Hey everybody, and welcome to Bright Founders Talk at Temy. Temy is an international software development company that designs, builds, and delivers software for sustainable businesses and promising startups. Welcome to our podcast where we bring you the most inspiring stories of entrepreneurs and experts in the software development industry. Each week, we interview successful leaders who share their unique journeys and valuable insights. Our today's guest speaker is Evan Schnidman, who is co-founder of Outrigger Group. Hello, Evan. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast and making the time to join us. So I saw the fact that actually you are co-host of the podcast. And what are your feelings today to be, let's say, on another side of the podcast, to be a guest?
Yeah, it's fun to be on this side. It takes a different kind of preparation to be a guest on a podcast versus to be a host or co-host. And so I'm excited to get to answer your questions, not be on the other side asking questions.
Perfect. So I feel like that it will be the best for us to start our discussion about entrepreneurship, about your successful story. From the question, what actually inspired you to pursue entrepreneurship? And maybe you have some accurate experiences or skill from your background that you believe have been valuable in your entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one I've thought a lot about over the years. My formal training is actually as an academic game theorist. So I was modeling small group decision dynamics during the financial crisis and decided to analyze central bank policy, central bank communication, how they make decisions. And really, I found myself in this odd situation of developing technology that I was pretty sure I could commercialize. But I was down this path of not only getting a PhD, but taking a faculty job as an academic. And I really, at that moment in time, found myself sitting in a faculty meeting going, this is not what I want to be doing with my life. And I took the leap to become an entrepreneur. And thankfully, I have an extremely supportive family. Both my parents had their own businesses. My mother ran her own consulting firm. My father ran an accounting firm. We don't typically think of consultants or accountants as entrepreneurs, but they each had their own business my entire life. And so I grew up around people who had taken that risk and had really, understood what it was like to never be off, to be running your own business, to have people reliant on you 24/7, 365 days of the year. And that's kind of just always what seemed normal to me. And so maybe that leap wasn't quite as big for me as it might have been had I grown up with a different group of people around me.
It's really great now that you have this support group, because we believe it's really important that someone can motivate and empower you in the hard times, because entrepreneurship is not only about successful moments, sometimes it's also about falls. So in the beginning, I mentioned only one of your company, Outrigger Group, but actually you are also a co-founder of Market Reader and Prattle. So could you walk us through your journey of founding all of these companies and what inspired you to create these companies?
Yeah, I guess I'll start chronologically with the oldest first and move my way forward a little bit, because I think it's probably the most logical way to go through the journey. So as I alluded to before, I started my career as an academic and left academia to commercialize technology I had developed to mathematically map linguistic patterns and tie them directly to price action. So I started out by analyzing central bank communications. And when I left academia to start Prattle, officially in 2014, but I really started work on that in late 2012. And when I left to jump into the entrepreneurial journey that's kind of taken place here over the last decade, I didn't know what I was getting myself into. Ignorance is bliss, and maybe if I had known what I was getting myself into, I might not have gone into it. But what I found was that there was a natural fit in the market for being able to analyze not only central bank communications, but ultimately being able to analyze corporate communications as well. And so there was a natural market among hedge funds, particularly quantitative hedge funds initially. We then were able to expand our market into the broader asset management community and ultimately to corporates as well. And so the journey with Prattle was very difficult this first couple of years. We really didn't understand how to establish product market fit. We didn't really grasp the fact that the quantitative finance market was too small for us to scale a business. And so we had to expand our market relevance. And so as we grew that business, I learned a lot. I was very, very fortunate to be in the early days of what has become the alternative data community. And that term alternative data literally didn't exist when I started Prattle. And so we were really in a unique situation to help define the category and educate the market. 5 years later, in 2019, when we went and sold Prattle to LiquidNet, I was in another interesting moment in time. I had looked around in 2018 and said, "Oh wow, BERT is really revolutionary. This is the first large language model launched by Google." And I looked at what LLMs were doing and said, "Hey, the traditional world of NLP is going to get upended here in the next couple of years. We're going to be on a product treadmill, and I don't know that we're going to be able to keep up without a massive amount of funding." And we had the opportunity to sell the business at that time, so we took that opportunity. I then spent a year at LiquidNet running their data and innovation practice, helping stand up the investment analytics business. And when I left LiquidNet in 2020, it was peak pandemic. It was April of 2020. I looked around and said, "I'll do consulting." I had no idea what that meant. I basically just said, I'll go out and get some consulting clients and continue to some of the work I had started doing, advising early stage startups. And while the consulting work was lucrative and very interesting in some respects, I realized I was making a much, much larger impact on the early stage companies I was working with. And one of my consulting clients, a company called Ex-Ante Data, we were working together to develop a new product. And I looked at the CEO and CTO, and they looked at me and we said, I think this product might actually be a business unto itself. And so Market Reader was born. We spun off a separate company to identify unusual volatility in asset prices and then explain that volatility. So when a price gaps up or when there's an unusual number of shares traded, we're able to look on calendar information across a suite of factor models, news, and social media to not only identify that there is an unusual move, this is actually truly abnormal, but what's the most plausible explanation. And that product, the initial conception, it really has, since initial conception, it really hasn't changed, right? We've done a great job of sticking to what the initial design was, but discovering along the way that our addressable market for it is actually quite a bit larger than we had initially realized. We thought this would be a tool for retail investors and financial advisors, and we're finding that many of the traditional asset managers, the professional institutional investors are sitting there saying they struggle to answer these questions day to day as well. And so Market Reader has been an incredible journey to see a larger and larger addressable market for the same core product type. And so I think that's a really interesting example of how a team of folks who built businesses before. My colleagues, my co-founders on that, Jens and Webb, have built a successful business before in the asset management community, and yet with my own background, we missized our market on the downside. We actually didn't realize quite how large it was. And I think that's a phenomenal lesson to always keep your eyes open to see where there are opportunities out there. And then along that journey, as I was helping stand up Market Reader and advising a number of companies, both as an investor and as an advisor or board member, what I found was that a lot of early stage companies really struggle to not only bring their products to market, but to really articulate the value proposition of something that's highly technical and might require some customer education. And I'm a wonky kind of guy. I have a PhD and like to do esoteric things with mathematics to explain behavior. And so being able to take that core skill set of being really deep on the technology and then pull that out to something that actually resonates with the core market, that's really become what's my defining characteristic in terms of building businesses, is how to take complex, nuanced, technical products to market. And I started to build out a practice of that go-to-market strategy advising and broader advisory work on operations. And ultimately, as that consulting practice grew with early stage companies, I looked at a former colleague of mine, Brian Peterson, who was doing fractional ops and fractional CFO work. And Brian and I said, hey, tons of overlap in our businesses. Let's combine and create Outrigger Group. And so we did. We brought in a number of affiliates who can advise on a variety of other things, whether it be technical product strategy or capital raising and M&A strategy, or a variety of other things to really help accelerate the growth of early and growth stage businesses. And in fact, we're now working with a number of venture funds to help support their portfolio companies, particularly in a world where, look, the economy is not what it was 2 years ago. A lot of the venture funds have struggled. Their portfolio companies have struggled. They may not be able to have an operating partner on staff to serve that role of being very, a very experienced person, maybe only providing a few hours a week, but it's helping guide the ship to make sure that a lot of these early stage companies can grow quickly. They don't have to veer off course to solve one problem or another, that someone's there to help them really understand what it is that they need to be doing day in and day out, and how to stay focused. And so a lot of what we do with Outrigger is some of that operational work, some of that go-to-market strategy, but also some of the nitty-gritty financial modeling and really understanding, what investors expect to see in a deck, or how to close that first sale, or even what contracting looks like. And so we've done a lot of that work, and thankfully I've been able to work with now dozens of companies and have a lot of pattern recognition to see what does and doesn't work there.
Wow, it's really, really captivating story. This journey is really long, and I can say that this entrepreneurial journey is going on actually. And looking through this journey, what were some of the biggest challenges for you faced while starting and growing your companies, and how did you overcome them? Maybe you have some secrets and you can share with our audience.
Yeah, so I guess a couple of things. So first and foremost, I come at this from the lens of being somebody who overthinks everything, and having been an academic previously, I came from a world where things were extraordinarily well researched. If you could provide a book that was better than a paper, if you could provide a paper that was better than a case study, right, and so on and so forth. And so you end up with this mentality of more evidence is better. And that's not how the world actually works when you're trying to commercialize something. Better evidence is better, right? A more targeted approach is better. And so what ends up happening when you try to commercialize a product, particularly a software product, but I think data products fall into the same category, is you need to simplify. And in fact, if you're assuming your audience any baseline level of knowledge, you better be able to prove that with 100% of your audience. Because if you can't prove that with 100% of your audience, you need to make it simpler. People don't want to have to think about how to integrate your software product, your data product. They want to just know. And unfortunately, that means that having that wonky approach of literally writing a book or writing a long form white paper probably isn't the answer. Case studies are better. If you can collate something down to a one-page case study that is easily digestible for your customer, for your client, then that's what you should do. And I think that was a hard lesson for me to learn. Was I kept thinking we could just provide more evidence, more technical support. And it wasn't the right type of technical support when we were building Prattle. And I think now with Market Reader, we've been able to avoid those missteps and stick to really simple case studies. Even things that we can just tweet out, right? And I see this a lot with the companies I work with through Outrigger, where really brilliant entrepreneurs have built something extremely technical and they want to show off how technical it is. They want to explain to people why this is unique or there's greater value there. And the vast majority of clients just don't care. What they care about is, will this work for my use case? And that's what they want to know. Mm-hmm. And if the answer is yes, then they will use it. If the answer is no, it doesn't matter how much support you provide them. And so the trick with product market fit, the trick with really understanding how to commercialize something highly technical mm-hmm. is to simplify. And it took me a really long time to learn that.
Okay, simplify is about everything. Let's sum up our question. So let's move again about your experience with all of these three companies. What you can say that such fact, what sets your companies apart from others in the market?
Yeah, I think I'll take each one in turn. What set Prattle apart was the fact that we were very early in the space. There were only a couple of other natural language processing companies out there. No one else was analyzing central bank communications when we launched that product. When we launched our earnings call product, we were the first player to have complete coverage of the US market. And methodologically, what we were doing was far more sophisticated than the market was used to seeing. We had created a system to essentially eliminate bias. So we were mathematically mapping linguistic patterns and tying them to price action, essentially saying this is what how we expect the market to respond to this type of communication. So we weren't saying that a Fed communication was hawkish or dovish. We were saying the market was going to respond as though it's hawkish or dovish. And the same goes for corporate communications. We weren't saying the market that this is positive or negative in some abstract sense. It is the market is likely to respond as though this is positive or negative. And that allowed people to have a more directly actionable signal. And so I think that was a really unique approach, both methodologically and just because of the timing. We were early in the NLP landscape, and so we had a bit of a first mover advantage there. What we've done with Market Reader is quite a bit different. From a technical standpoint, it's not nearly as complicated to be able to do any one leg of what we're doing in terms of explaining why the market is moving in real time. But the caveat there is, I just said the words in real time and with complete coverage of right now the US equities market, but the ambition is to eventually be global and across asset classes. That's an enormous amount of data. We're processing more than 10,000 rows of data per security every 10 minutes. And our whole system refreshes every 10 minutes. So to be able to get those models right at scale in near real time across a whole suite of models covering news, social media, calendar information, factor modeling, right? All of those things play in. And to be able to do it consistently right was extremely hard. And I think from a data engineering standpoint, that's really where we've done something unique there. With Outrigger, it's very different. My value add, our team's value add is that we've seen everything. We've been there, we've done that. We've worked with dozens of companies. We've made every mistake. And in many cases, we can just help early and growth stage companies navigate around those obstacles and see them coming much earlier than they might have otherwise been able to, right? We have the benefit of a 360-degree view of the market. Whereas when you're running a startup, it's 1,000 miles an hour and heads down the whole time. You kind of have to have blinders on. And our job is to pick up our heads and say, hey, this is what's actually going on. If you reframe in this way or take a couple weeks and rework your materials to go after this market instead, you're gonna have a lot higher degree of success. Your close rate's gonna go up, or you're gonna be able to raise that next round of capital more easily.
It's really, really impressive, and thank you for sharing this. I believe that will help our viewers. And now I want to focus more about your personal story as entrepreneur. how do you actually stay motivated and focused on achieving your goals as an entrepreneur? Because we all understand that all of this takes a lot of your time, and maybe sometimes you need to sacrifice something. Could you please share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'll be the first one to admit I'm a workaholic. I love what I do. I get motivated by working with brilliant entrepreneurs who are doing interesting things and trying to help them.
Mhm.
I think that a lot of success comes from the people you surround yourself with. And I just don't work with people I don't want to work with. And I'm very fortunate that I've been able to build my life in that way and get motivation from working with great people. Now that doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean I'm not putting in 18-hour days pretty routinely. That's kind of the norm, not an anomaly. I have been very lucky that I've been able to build multiple businesses, in some cases at the same time. My brain works in a way where I have very low switching costs. I'm very good at jumping from one thing to another, which I gather is not the norm, and I'm lucky that I'm wired that way. But the caveat is that it's very easy to get overwhelmed, and to figuring out prioritization is really challenging sometimes. And so for me, a lot of that motivation comes from the people that I get to work with and the brilliant ideas that they come up with, and figuring out how to help them operationalize those ideas.
Really captivating. I believe that your team is also motivated by your achievement in the industry. So again, about your story, entrepreneurial story, I consider that you faced some kind of failure, setback. Could you please share with us this experience, and how did you handle with it?
Yeah, lots of failures, lots of setbacks along the way. Far too many to count. I will say, we had a lot of setbacks in the early days of starting Prattle.
Mm-hmm.
We really didn't understand our addressable market. We really didn't understand how to sell to hedge funds. We didn't understand that we needed to simplify our product. It took years. It took probably 18 to 24 months for us to really understand what we were doing, and then another year before we had material revenues. So we were 3 years into the business before I had a really, really good understanding of what needed to happen to successfully execute. Now, at that point, I had worn through the soles of many pairs of shoes, running around New York, running around London, trying to make sales to hedge funds. And so a lot of it was just keeping at it. A lot of it was also brand building. Mm-hmm. We realized that it was so much easier to close sales when we had inbound as opposed to outbound. The more we could do to enhance our brand, the better off we were going to be in terms of being able to get those inbound sales with a much higher conversion rate, faster sales cycle, lower churn. And so it was just a much better use of our resources to focus in on that type of marketing, that type of PR. And so that was a hard lesson learned. And frankly, I think it probably took us too long to learn it. Mm-hmm. And then, a few years later, we were in the position to either raise our next round of capital with Prattle or sell the company. We had an acquisition offer on the table. We had a term sheet in hand for our next round of capital. And we turned down the term sheet to take the acquisition offer, and the acquisition fell apart. We were in this terrible situation of saying, okay, we're low on operating capital. We had this great offer that fell apart for internal political reasons at the acquirer. And we had to go out and say, okay, well, we need to restart a process and take other bids. And, thankfully we had a couple other parties that were interested in the company, and we were able to sell the company shortly thereafter. But it was a nerve-wracking few weeks there. That meant that, there was the real possibility that the company wouldn't have survived that, and that we were going to need a cash infusion and things like that. And thankfully we got a deal done in time that wasn't necessary. But it was a trying time for sure. And I think a lot of companies are experiencing things like that right now in this market. A lot of venture funds have pulled back on funding. Angel investors are not as active as they were 2 years ago. And I think a lot of companies are sitting there saying, what do we do next? And that's a tough situation to find yourself in. It's exhausting. It's trying. I can remember having a standing 1 a.m. call with my attorney. Every day at 1 o'clock in the morning, we talked because we knew we'd both be working, and it was kind of a guarantee that that we needed to connect to get a deal done in the acquisition process when LiquidNet was acquiring Prattle. And that's just sometimes what it takes.
If we talk about failures and setbacks, it's really important to mention also some achievements. Can you tell us about a particularly memorable moment or accomplishment in your entrepreneurial journey? Maybe some kind of your first successful client, first successful deal.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think back on this a lot. It's not the first sale that really gets me excited. It was the first sale that we did where from the initial introduction to the client to the first close, to closing the contract and getting paid, the first time we did that in under a month, that felt like an achievement. Because that was the first time it really meant that we had achieved not only product market fit, but we understood our sales cycle. We could actually get through the entire process from the very first time we met with a prospective client to actually having a signed contract and money in our bank account in a little over 3 weeks in this particular case. That felt like a huge accomplishment from what had been a 6-month sales cycle, right? And with some of the banks, some of the large asset managers, it was more like a year. And so the fact that we actually had honed our sales process, understood how to have workflow emails and touch points and follow-ups and the right collateral in their hands at the right moment in time while they were testing the product, and bring our sales cycle down to a point where we were able to get a deal done that quickly, that felt like a huge accomplishment to me, right? And that was the first time I really looked around and said, hey, I think we're doing this right. And that was especially, early days of Prattle. As I said, we struggled with a very long sales cycle. We struggled to understand our clients' needs. And so, to a couple of years later, hit a point where we were consistently closing sales in under 6 weeks. And actually and I vividly remember the first sale we closed in under a month. And that felt like we really made it.
Really, really inspiring. Thank you for sharing with us this memorable moment. And I wanted to just come back for a minute to the question regarding your companies and about the industry in whole overview. How do you stay on top of industry trends and ensure that your companies remain innovative and competitive?
I listen to books when I'm walking the dog. I read constantly. I take meetings all the time. If there's a source of information I can be getting access to, I'm going to get access to it. And a lot of that is during business hours. I typically am on calls pretty much all day long, talking to people who understand industry trends, learning from my clients, letting them learn from me too. But also then, after hours, it literally is, crank up the audible speed to 3.5 times and go for a walk with the dog and plow through books on every subject that I would need to know, and reading every newsletter I get in the mornings and catching up on other news in the evenings. I have a backlog of articles that I save for myself every weekend and sit down on the weekends for a few hours to catch up on those. I consume information voraciously, and I learn the most from my conversations with other people because it helps me kind of hone my thought process around what I've learned, around what I've read. And so, it's not easy, but it's one of those things where keeping up with trends never is, especially in a world where, we see, especially AI these days, changing so quickly, and really understanding the applications of that and what that means commercially, whether that means, our vertical AI solutions actually venture backable. That's a big question among the venture community right now. And so, I've done a lot of work reading up on those solutions, talking to a lot of founders, talking to a lot of venture capitalists to understand where they see the market going. And, and understanding those trends is a big part of my job as I see it.
You're literally 24/7 in business, as I can see. And do you manage to have some kind of work-life balance with all of this stuff?
Sure. I suppose I have some semblance of a work-life balance. I'm very lucky to be able to spend most of my days working from home, and therefore I get to do things like take my dog for a walk when the weather is nice. And yes, I usually listen to a book while I do that, but it's a nice way to step away from your desk. And I very much enjoy cooking, so I will often, as I was late last night, be found in the kitchen with a book going, listening to something while I'm chopping vegetables or something like that. So I do multitask quite a bit, but it does mean that I have some semblance of a life outside of work, just often concurrently with work.
And to sum up our conversation about your journey, could you please share with our audience some advice which is really crucial for first-time entrepreneurs?
Oh gosh, the most important thing for a first-time entrepreneur is to really, really, really understand your market. That's the mistake I made. It cost me 2 years of spinning my wheels and learning my market before I really understood how to sell into it. You might have the greatest product, but if you don't understand your market, you're not going to be able to sell. And so that's the big thing. I think a lot of entrepreneurs are very product focused. They're very focused on their technology, their edge. They need to be really focused on their market, their customers. What do their customers want? And really deeply understanding their use case. I think that's the key to building a successful business. It's also a key to staying focused. Product development's really hard. And if you're trying to focus on boiling the ocean, you're not going to succeed. If you're trying to focus on boiling a raindrop, it's pretty damn easy. And so I think, the goal should always be for a first-time entrepreneur to have the deepest possible understanding of their clients, of their market, and understand where your business sits. If your market is enormous, then maybe you can build a venture scale business. If your market's not huge, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with going after a niche market. It just means that your sources of funding and how you grow the business look different. And knowing where you sit in the market is really important, because otherwise you're going to waste your time chasing funding sources that are not really a fit for your business. And so it all comes back to understanding your market.
Evan, thank you for coming on the podcast today. Thanks again for sharing your knowledge with us and our listeners. I believe that maybe one time we will record one more video again together. Thank you.
Thank you.